All right, let's get rolling. Today, as we continue our review, there is quick warning. I don't know if it's a warning, but quick point on these two chapters is I think imperialism is absolutely huge. I'd probably rank imperialism behind Enlightenment and absolutism for top three most significant, most often tested sections. Yeah.
What's not huge on this test?
What don't they put a lot on? There's not many key concepts and stuff like World War II.
I thought you were going to say there's not many key concepts.
No, there's not many key concepts you should know. Sit down, girl. Shut up. All right. So for the before and after, the era before imperialism, you will always look for what era would we pick that comes before it? You know? Industrial Rev, you definitely should put on there. Even before that, if we have to put all our things on all our units on one common time period, what comes before that?
Exploration.
I would do exploration here. Exploration. And then I would also throw in, let's put that in a cluster. After it, big ones after it are going to be World War I. Most of what we do here today is going to be about leading up to the actual war. So the clusters, for us to remember. All right. There's two clusters that I would know. Number one, the main point is nationalism. Specifically the competition that it's going to cause. Okay? Nationalism, especially the competition, that's what so much of this comes from, because everything we're doing is leading towards World War I. The other one you want in the background is the cultures class. Right? Just like with exploration, just like with the conquistadors and so many other moments, the cultures of two eras, two places, two things are going to clash in a pretty big way. Okay? So number one, we have to look at reasons. Okay? Now the reasons for this are that in the background, right here, all the way into World War I is going to be the Industrial Rev, all right? The Industrial Rev and imperialism. I know we put Industrial Rev as before, but it really is during. Okay? They go hand in hand. You will not have one without the other. Many of these places, many of these future colonies are discovered in the 1400s, in the 1500s, but they are not truly imperialized until we get into the Industrial Revolution. And the number one reason that the Industrial Rev is a cause is, what do we need the colonies for? Trade, right? Trade. We need trade in two ways. Number one, we need resources. What's the other reason we need colonies? Markets. All right? So that's how else does the Industrial Revolution help spur imperialism? Technology. Okay? There's two types of technology. Number one is we have new transportation. Right? The steamboat. Steamboats invented in the early, the 1830s, I think, right? By Robert Fulton out of New York. Steamboats certainly a big factor in starting to be able to sail long distances in heavy weather. I would put with transportation, I would put communication. Right? We are starting our first telegraph line is in the 1850s. It's really hard to control a colony if you can't have direct communication. And now that we have direct communication in the 1800s, control over these colonies is going to absolutely explode. But the number one point of technology is new weapons. New weapons. It's one way that white Western culture is going to be able to dominate non-Western culture. And that's what imperialism is about. It's not really about the culture class. It's not really about two cultures. It's about one culture absolutely dominating, either destroying or assimilating the other. Most famous weapons in this time period, there's two you should know. Maxim machine gun, right? Which is, think the big World War I machine gun, the water-cooled thing. Right? And the other one is a type of bullet. It's we go from a ball to a rounded bullet. Let me know. It's called a mini ball. MINIE ball. It's named after the guy who invented it. All right. For the first time, we go from that round musket ball to a cone-shaped bullet. That's like it's like throwing a football instead of kicking a soccer ball, right? You have rifling comes next. You have cartridges that come next. That's the big during the 1860s wars of Otto von Bismarck and the industrial Prussian army. The fact that you can just pull a bolt back and load. We are getting there in industrialism. Another one that is kind of similar, but I'll put in the same thread here, is nationalism. It's about competition. It's about domination. It's no coincidence that for England's biggest competition, even though England dominates above everybody else, England's biggest competition comes from what country? Who's going to be England's biggest competition in anything? France, right? Because we haven't got to that wonderful 1905-1911 Moroccan crisis where William II forces France and England to become united for the first time. This competition will eventually lead to tensions, and they will eventually lead to what? World War I. Imperialism is a major cause of World War I, which we'll talk about in our next unit. Next, 2 moments I would know for competition. It's right here. 1884. You know what was 1884? The Berlin Conference. When Otto von Bismarck invited all the leaders of European countries to come to Berlin. And what did they do at the Berlin Conference? Put a big map of Africa up on a wall, threw darts at it, divided up as evenly as possible. Who got the most colonies in Africa? Britain. Who got the second most? France. Germany actually gets very little. But if they didn't host this, they probably would have gotten none. Right? Germany, Italy, all involved, but definitely to a smaller level. And then finally in 1905 and 11, you have to put the Moroccan... You have to put the Moroccan crisis, okay? Because that's the first time France and England fall in love in the modern era. And it's important because everything we're doing is leading to World War I. Okay? Everything we're doing is leading to World War I. And that's all you need to know for kind of the background of imperialism, kind of the facts of imperialism. There's not many other dates or moments that you need to know. Okay? There's good stuff you can know. It may show up in an essay, it may help you write, but that's the key concepts, man. Know them, memorize them. All right. There's a couple writers and then a debate about imperialism that I think we should know. Okay, there's only 2 writers I'm going to mention. There's about 4 in the key concepts. There's two that I would know. First off is the first true fantasy writer ever, like sci-fi. He's about exploration. Does anybody know who he is? You guys got to get some culture. Jules Verne. Don't look confused, Owen. What did Jules Verne write? 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Journey to the Center of the Earth. Right? These ideas, I think around the world in 80 days. Right? These ideas that there are some mythical moments. Right? And wouldn't it be great to go and explore these great... And he talks about interaction with other cultures and stuff like that. He helps inspire, right? He's kind of like the Portlands from the early explorers. He inspires a new generation of people to grow up. And one writer who writes a novel that's very critical of imperialism is Joseph Conrad. What book does he write? No. Good guess on War of the Worlds. No. He writes a book called Heart. All of Darkness. The book Heart of Darkness is about a British explorer, a British, good-timey, classic British guy. And he goes to Africa, and at first he's nice to the native people. He treats them like human beings. He understands their culture. But over time, the novel's really long and boring, but the point is that over time, because of his interactions with them, because of Britain deals with its imperialism, he becomes angry. He becomes racist. He brings out his true heart of darkness. And it's really a condemnation of imperialism and what it does to good people and how they view the world. So Jules Verne with exploration, Conrad with the heart of darkness. Now a writer who argues with imperialism, and there's a lot, but I'm only going to ask you to know one. His name is Hobson. His name is Hobson. And he writes an article called Imperialism, right? Where he says imperialism is bad. Pirate eye. There we go. I've got 3 eyes. Does anybody have any idea why he says imperialism is bad? What do you think? Yeah. Costs money, there's political problems, creates competition, sure, but he has one overarching point. He says that imperialism, the problem with imperialism is economic, okay? All the state, the government, spends all of this money, and people are convinced that their state is going to go out because of nationalism and do great things. But who does imperialism benefit? The rich. Okay? It only benefits the rich. Says the government has the army, the government keeps security, the government builds the railroads. It's only the rich business owners that truly benefit from imperialism. Which is ironic because it's one of our gray box terms that who agrees with them? Who do you think would agree with that statement in condemning? Not Stalin, you're so close though. Lenin. Lenin actually writes a book in support of Hobson. He says he's right. All we're doing is supporting the rich. Our last point. Is non-West challenges. Non-West challenges. Eventually, when we get deeper and deeper and deeper into imperialism, we start to see some more people, some more groups rise up and fight against the European rulers, and mostly they end up fighting against the British rulers because British dominate the most countries. Now, number one, just like when Napoleon took over Europe, because European countries take over these non-European countries, what do non-European countries start to get a bigger sense of? Nationalism, right? This nationalism helps them inspire them. You bring in some of these Enlightenment ideas from the century before as these people start to read, right? And many of them, use nationalism to unite and fight the British. But what's another good way? Why can't you stand up to the British, even if you really want to? You don't have the weapons, you don't have the infrastructure, you don't have the means. So you need to modernize. You need to modernize. Okay? To compete with the West, you must modernize. Some examples of this. The most famous one is right in the 1850s. In India, we had what? Gandhi is in the 1930s. The Sepoy Rebellion. That was the one. Sepoys are Indian soldiers. Do you remember with the new guns, they had cartridges of gunpowder. The Indians had to bite the cartridges off, but they used glue made from cows. So there was a big Sepoy Rebellion. It's a sign. This is, by the way, this is what causes Hobson to write his book. He says, listen, who spent all the money to squash the rebellion? Who spent the millions of dollars back then to make everything safe again? It was the government. It was the taxpayers. But who benefits? Only the people who own companies trading with India. Everybody else, it's a net loss for them. Another one that's a simple rebellion is the Zulus. You might see those. The Zulus, where are the Zulus from? Where? South Africa. They're in South African region. But two that I want to know. Notice, first off, in the late 1900s, we finally see China. What was the revolt in China? Boxer Rebellion. And this was a general outcry against foreigners. Violence against foreigners, trying to get them to stop, trying to get them to leave. And the other country we have to note, that's not a violent revolution. They are truly the ones who meet the Western challenge with modernization. What country? Japan. And what are we going to know from them? The Meiji Restoration. Meiji Restoration is in the mid to late 1800s. In order to combat against Western imperialism. And you remember why Japan will do this? First off, they're probably the most advanced of these countries. Secondly, they had Commodore Perry open them up forcefully with gunboat diplomacy, and they could not stand up to him. So they decided in the Meiji Restoration to forcefully modernize their country. The government invests, they become industrialized, and they will truly break free of all Western influence. Questions, comments, concerns? Awesome. Next timeline. World War I. All right. As you're going to see with World War I, shut up, I got 15 minutes, maybe we'll even get done early. As you're going to see with World War I, there really aren't too many dates you have to know. They're not going to ask you about a lot of events of World War I. You're not going to need to know the Battle of Verdun or the Battle at the Somme. It's useless to go back and study that because you already need to know. How are they going to ask you about Verdun and Somme if it comes up? No. Don't care about turning points. Not the key concepts. They won't ask you about it. Say it again? Maybe in a primary source, but they are going to ask it about you because they're trying to get at World War I. What kind of war was it? Total war. So brutal. Lots of deaths, not only on the front but at home, which both of those battles saw. And what was most of the war? Trench warfare. That's a key concept. And how did it go? Stalemate. That's it. You don't need to know turning points. You don't need to know how many dead. You really don't even know. You really don't even need to know how many are involved. Okay, so look at what I have up here because most of what you know about World War I will fit into something here. So, before we know, there's two. The two most important eras coming before World War I are nationalism. What were the highlights of our nationalism timeline? What? No, what were the highlights of our nationalism timeline? You remember back? Who's the most famous? Nationalism is 1800s nationalism. Close door. Unification of Germany, right? Otto von Bismarck. What does that do to Europe? It's our cluster. It upsets the balance of power. This is a great example. The creation of Germany, the creation of Italy upsets the balance of power in Germany. It makes Germany what? Sick. Germany is sick. Millions are going to die. All right? The other one that you have to put, I think, is imperialism and maybe industrial rev. Those are minor points, but This is the first time we truly get to see the impacts of both of those. So now, a balance of power, we are going to get upset. Now, again, balance of power is going to cause World War I, but the bigger key concepts, the ones you really need to know, are about how does World War I upset the balance after Europe? How does Europe in the world change? And it's going to change in Eastern Europe, right? What's going to happen in Eastern Europe? Who says it best? In 1919, Woodrow Wilson gets up in front of the world and says, self-determination. So you're going to see Eastern Europe start to go through some revolutionary struggles. And self-determination and balance of power also changes outside of Europe. How? Ooh, America Rising, we'll talk about that. But it's the end of colonialism. End of colonialism, right? We are shifting the power in the world. Now, most of these colonies don't get their independence until after World War II. But World War I starts it. So what comes after World War I? The end of imperialism. We also have the age of anxiety. And then we can say the Great Depression, we can say the Weimar Republic, but so much of what we're leading towards, when we finish Europe and World War I in Europe, we are going to be leading towards the rise of what? Totalitarian dictators in World War II. So much of what we'll do will revolve around that concept, that they are coming. So, first up, build up in war. The build up in war. I do think it's worthwhile noting because the College Board actually cites this in its main in its key concepts. But Maine. The 4 reasons for the start of World War I. If you can't rattle them off right now, then write them down in your notes. What M is militarism, right? The rising military. We saw that in our practice test yesterday, right? You have to know that militarism is coming in 1914, and it's really building up for years prior. Okay. A is alliances. It's the way a small war in the Balkans, a small scuffle, a small conflict in the Balkans can explode to the rest of the world. Imperialism, countries are competing. They are building tension and eventually driving into war. And then finally, nationalism is an overarching concept that's really come about in the mid to late 1800s. Okay. The other point as we get into war, the reason World War I is so deadly is because of technology / industry. We are mass producing killing machines for the first time in human history. And you do need to know some of these. What's a good example of a new machine technology in World War I? I put tanks and airplanes. I would put the machine gun again. It's the first one they list, and I think you'll remember it. Machine gun in both imperialism and World War I. Still the Maxim, though. It's a little upgraded by the time we get to World War I. What's the big one, though? No, that's not a new concept. It's used a lot. What'd you say? Poison gas. Poison gas. Has to be mentioned. If you get questions about technology, you'll usually get questions about poison gas. Once the war actually gets over, there's 2 words you need to know about how war is fought. You don't need to know all the battles and all this other crap. World War I is a stalemate, and that results in total war. Write those down word for word and underline them. That means people are going to suffer on a battlefront, and that means especially people are going to suffer at home. Where do people really suffer at home during World War I? Russia. How do you know that? And they're going to be in revolution before the end of this war, right? They also suffer for many of the minor countries, especially a place like Austria. How do we know Austria-Hungary is going to suffer? Because they're falling apart also. The Balkans are falling apart, right? So it's quite brutal. It will cause revolutions is his actual point. actually causing revolutions throughout Europe is one of the effects of World War II. And there is much suffering. Keep that in mind. When we get to Age of Anxiety, and World War I is really about making excuses in countries for totalitarian dictators to take over. One of the reasons is the amount of suffering that people experienced during World War I. All right. The non-Europe theater. One point about World War I is that it spreads outside of the country or outside of the continent. There's one big one I would know, and that's the Arab revolts. Who are the Arabs revolting against? Who controls that whole region? The Turks. The Ottoman Turks. The Ottoman Empire, soon to be Turkey, right? That controls the whole region, and it's losing its power and influence. And the reason we bring this up is because how did the Arabs successfully revolt against the Turks? Lawrence of Arabia. Where's Lawrence from? Great Britain. Did you guys watch the movie yet? Phenomenal movie. You're a liar. Andy M. Gold star for you. Did you like it? Good. Lawrence of Arabia, the British helps the Arabs get revolted. And what does Britain promise them if they revolt versus the Turks now? They will get independence. And while Arabia becomes Saudi Arabia, most of the rest of the Middle East is going to be divided up, which is incredibly significant to your lives today. And then finally, we need to look at Japan. We don't talk about Japan much during World War I, but what we should note is that they are becoming very aggressive on their side of the world. They're starting to conquer some islands and even threatening China, which will become a big deal later on. And our last category, well, it's a big one, is the world balance of power shift. Okay? Because of World War I, because of the war itself, first off, one other thing I should have noted over here for the build-up is, where does the war actually start? What region of the world? Balkans. I know it's in another timeline, but do you remember the First and Second Balkan War? First and Second Balkan War is a key concept that it helped drive World War I. Okay. We know in 1914, Ferdinand was shot. And the last dates that we'll end with, we should all know 11/11/1918, which is Armistice Day. That's when the world stopped firing. In the next summer, in 1919, we have the Treaty of Versailles, which is the most important document in modern European history. So there you go. That's all the facts of the war you need to know. Now let's look at how it ends and what the change is. First off, for balance of power shift, I'll say it the 1,000th time. It's the end of imperialism. It's the end of imperialism. There are still colonies, but officially, from this point onward, the Europe's power over these colonies is going to tank, and tank rapidly. Many countries like India will get their independence after World War I, before World War II. Some countries like Egypt, because of their value in the Suez Canal, is going to hold out until after World War II, but they'll get it eventually. And the other one that we should note is the rise of the USA. The rise of the USA as a powerhouse. Even though we will return to isolationism, we are ending that policy here real quick. On December 7th, 1941, that ends in America for good and forever at this point. Okay? So we need to look specifically at the document that ended the war, specifically at the Treaty of Versailles. And the most important thing to note about the Treaty of Versailles is what? It satisfied, this is a key concept, term. It fully satisfied, I can't read that. It fully satisfies nobody. Nobody is truly happy with the outcomes of the Treaty of Versailles. Number one problem, it punished Germany. It punishes Germany, which is going to lead to the rise of dictators, which will lead to World War I. How do they punish Germany? There's a couple ways. What's the most egregious, terrible way they do it? It's the war guilt clause. There is some basis for ideas of reparations, even though those will come number 2 on this list. The idea that you need to blame Germany need to accept all the fault and misery for causing and carrying out World War I is ridiculous. And everybody can see that, even the Germans. Number 2, the reparations. Again, reparations aren't a crazy idea. They've been going on for 1,000 years, but these are way too high. And as Germany will start to suffer, they are not lightened up. They are not eased up for a very long time. And it will drive Germany lower and lower. It will make them more and more desperate, so they'll turn towards radical people like the Nazis. And ultimately, it dooms the Weimar Republic. The Weimar Republic has absolutely no chance. Absolutely no chance in Europe. The other point under the Treaty of Versailles that I can fit every other key concept into is Wilson's self-determination. Wilson's idea of self-determination, which is what? Is correct. Countries should be able to choose how they want to rule themselves. We will see this again at the end of World War II, as our president FDR calls what's his name? Truman, call for Stalin to let the Eastern Bloc have self-determination again. It'll fail that time too. They'll all become communists, right? But what this self-determination does, unfortunately, is it upsets Europe. We see some countries fall into civil war. We see many countries try to become their own independent country, but that causes problems. Examples of this would be Poland, right? Trying to gain its independence, and though it's successful, it's a very weak state in between two powerful states. Poland is going to pay worse than anybody in World War II. And the other one that will form as a result of this. What country starts to form after World War I? Czechoslovakia is on this list. You're right. I didn't put it up here, but you can write down Czechoslovakia if you remember it. Yugoslavia. The idea that these people can gather together and rule themselves. That's not going to work long run. All right? Okay. Where else does self-determination play a factor? Colonies. This is why imperialism is going to start to end people in colonies because of better communication and technology. Here, ideas like Wilson's self-determination, they will begin to demand and fight for their independence. Perhaps strongest are the Mandate territories. Where are the Mandate territories? That's the Middle East. When you see Mandate territories, all they mean is the divided up newish countries in the Middle East. This is something that still has super relevance today. A place like Iraq would never be a country without Mandate territory. Why would Iraq never be a country? There's about 2 or 3 dominant ethnicities, religions and whatnot in Iraq they would never form together to form one country. It's a simple fact, and history tells us that that's true, right? Well, they are created. Who creates? Who's the primary creator in the Mandate territories? Britain, who's number 2 and 3, right with them. France and the U.S., okay? Some of the territories you should know: Iraq, Syria, and the big one, Palestine. That's the big one because after World War II, the UN, led by Great Britain and America, will take a chunk out of Palestine and create what? Israel. So the Mandate territory is a big deal. And it's also a big deal because Britain promised to the Arabs and promised to most Middle Eastern people that they would get the right to rule themselves after World War I. And here they are going back on their word. The last point of the Treaty of Versailles that you should know, you already know, that is a sign that the Treaty of Versailles is a failure is what? What else does the Treaty of Versailles try to do that fails? League of Nations. League of Nations is doomed before its first meeting. And you guys know that story from American history. It's 7:10, guys. That's all I got for you. Thanks for coming today.